Drac walks up calmly.
All right, Drac, the instant you blink and you have made your way into the tower, the sheer volume of magical energy charged in the air gives you like a borderline headache.
Drac just does like that thing where he like shudders and like cracks his neck a bit and just keeps walking forward.
You have been next to people hit by doom bolts that blasted their souls into infinity that bothered you less than this place does.
Duly noted.
Okay, Wrist, you find a game real easy with a bunch of mercenaries who don't seem to, who seem more than happy to have your talkative self join them. All right, as the three of you approach, the man looks up and you notice that he's wearing a silver mask, and there's almost some weirdness going about his eyes. Like every time you look at them and really focus on them, they seem to change color. But after a second, he reaches up with his left hand, which is completely made out of silver, and he takes off his mask and sets it down on the table and smiles up at the three of you. And he has very, he just has very basic brown eyes when he takes off the mask. They're very warm and they seem very inviting. And he gestures to the table and he says, "Please, come, sit. We have much to discuss."
Verstadt motions forward and takes a seat. And says, "Thank you, my lord, Otto von Silverhand."
You said, so, am I surrounded by books and stuff?
Yeah, loads of books.
I will kind of look over to him and say, while we talk, I peruse.
He
Within sight of you, of course.
He looks up thoughtfully and he says, "You may look, but you may not touch."
I will nod.
He does smile then warmly at the three of you, and he says, "I've heard a little bit about the," and then he kind of looks and tuts and he says, "Where's the little one?"
Probably making mischief.
Making friends, I think was how he put it.
He nods and he turns and whispers something into his. Hold on a second.
So Sotek, I'm going to use a fortune point to increase that, so I succeed by another success level.
Okay. 67, 22. I'm rolling for some soldiers. 46, 14. Okay. After a game, a few rounds of cards. How much money do you have?
I have 8 brass pennies.
All right. After a few rounds of cards, talking nicely, roll a charm check. So after a few rounds of cards, you do manage to make off like a bandit and just destroy your opponents with some incredible luck. But after about 3 games in which you've earned yourself a whopping 50 brass total, you are growing merrily and start propositioning that maybe you should bet silver instead. But the men suddenly become very wary of you and your luck. And one of them suggests that playing with halflings is like akin to fishing, or is akin to swimming with trolls and expecting nothing to go wrong. And after a few more rounds of you claiming victory, you do manage to make off with that incredible roll, despite their dislike of you, with a total of 60 brass. But after a bit, one of the men almost leaps up and attacks you before his fellows grab him and try and calm him down. And they tell you, you should probably get going.
Ronald must have it in for me, making me look like a cheater. You know what? I'm a good, honest sort, so I'll buy you all around, and I will buy whatever passes for beer for a round for them.
All right.
To assuage their guilt and anger, and then I will head into the go see him.
Okay, yeah, it costs you 5 brass, but you do calm down all the hotheads. Though one of them, the man who tried to jump at you, still mutters about how halflings are disgusting degenerates that something 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 their own cousins and sisters and something something steal and something something should be put down and something something aren't part of the empire, yada yada. He seems a little upset.
Oh, okay. I'm sure he'll drink it off. You lads have a great day.
Soldier, angry
Right,
soldier.
so let me know when I join the rest of them.
At Half-Life. Okay, well, all right. He nods and says, Lord Otto nods and says, "Oh, I'm sure he'll be in after he swindles a few people." In any event, so tell me about yourselves a little bit. What are your names?
I am Verstadt. I am a graduate of the College of Fire in Altdorf.
He inclines his head and says, "A graduate, really?"
I am a little young to be a graduate, but aye.
He sort of raises an eyebrow and says, "It's not your age that surprises me. It's more of your, how do I say this? It's more of your aptitude."
You mean the fire in the forest?
He smirks and says, "Well, no, that I would expect from a bright wizard, but looking at you, you don't stand out to me. I mean, I can see obviously you have connection with the winds, but you don't seem particularly gifted or astounding."
I see.
And he quirks his head and says, "You graduated, so you have a license, I take it?"
I do. I present him the license.
He takes it from you and he looks at it.
Verstadt gets nervous.
Out of character, it is legit, right?
No.
Oh.
That being said, it is a very, very good forgery. Obviously none of your characters know that. Let me see.
That's hilarious.
Okay, that's the check he takes. 29, so he knows it's a
Better
fake.
hope you don't run into the actual
It's a
wizard.
very, very good fake, but he has a
Oh, Sotek.
he has a
Does
55.
that gambling session count as a very great risk for betting everything I had for my motivation to gain back resolve?
Yes. And also the fact that doing that well was very likely to get you shivved, but you managed to get out of there.
Nice.
All right, so yes, you gain back a resolve point. All right, so he knows it's a
You guys have
fake.
More resolve
Chat.
than
Yes.
what?
No, you cannot. Sorry, your resolve cannot go above your resilience.
Yes, it can,
Okay.
if you have a talent.
If you have a talent. Just like if you have lucky, your fortune can go above your fate.
I have said talent, that's why I know.
All right, so after a few moments looking at it, he passes your license back to you, which he knows is fake.
Thank you, sir.
And-
I'm want to do without it.
He nods and he says, "Who did you study under?"
My main magister was Magister Toledo. I don't suppose you're familiar with him. He has a brilliant flaming fox that is quite hard to forget.
Can't say I have, but I rarely interacted with the fire college.
What
He's
college
a metal
are
wizard,
you from?
isn't he?
He smirks and gestures around the room, and and nearly everything in the room has some kind of silver nonsense going on with it. If it's not a girl.
I will say he's of the metal kind.
Oh,
And
of course.
he points to you and he says, "Precisely. And which kingdom are you from?"
Widriel.
He steeples his fingers and he says, "A wood elf here? That's curious."
A wood elf that wanders is not very curious.
He nods. Halfling, you show up at this point.
Oh, I'd say a wood elf that wanders is very curious because they're out wandering. How are you chaps doing? He walks in. His purse is about 7 times bigger than it was when you last saw him.
Verstadt will gently pat the seat next to him.
Otto inclines his head before turning back to the elf and say, "And what is your name, dear lady?"
Verve.
He nods and says, Verve, I can also see you're adapting to the winds. What brings you to a lumbering company? You do know what a lumbering company is. I know your kind doesn't have them.
I will turn around and look at him and nod. I will say, I do not agree with what is going on here, but coin continues or allows me to travel comfortably, so I will deal with it for now.
He will nod and drum his fingers thoughtfully, and he said, and you said you're from Widrioth, and that would be where in the forest?
Along the Grey Mountains. The crags.
He nods and says, ah, I see. Good, good. So, interesting. And then he sort of seems to look around for a little bit before shaking his head and focusing back on the dwarf. And he frowns at the dwarf and he says, what is your name?
Drak Frostax, son of Rolf.
He nods and he says, those are uncommon titles for a dwarf.
Kraken, hail from Krakadrak, though I serve the High King as a ranger.
His one of his eyebrows raise up appreciatively, and he says, oh, a Norskin dwarf. That's why you're here. Interesting.
Aye. Your associates don't seem particularly welcoming.
Well, the Kvingtang clan has good reason not to trust those from
Do I
other
know
clans.
of this clan?
No, you've never heard of them.
Now that he said their name.
Nope.
Okay.
He nods and says, they have good reason not to trust those from outside the Grey Mountains, I can assure you. And then he looks down at the halfling and he says, I have a foreboding sense that you're not here to be a cook.
Ah, I'm a great cook. In fact, that'd be great. I understand that cooks don't wander off into the forest and have accidents, which is a great thing to be doing. But my profession is a town watchman. Both me father and me ma were cooks, and my Uncle Alex, a great cook, owns a little restaurant just down the street. And he will just continue on until interrupted about his Uncle Alex's shop and all the fine meals he can make.
Silverhand will interrupt you fairly quickly. He will heavily but not too sternly, bang his silver hand on the table, and he says, that's more than enough, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, the four of you arrived with Hans, then?
Yes.
We did.
And Hans made it safely?
Yes.
Good!
He's got some
Good.
bits, but he's fine.
You know, he gained some scratches and some experience, but he made it.
From what I learned of the fire, from my observations, it seems you had a little bit of a run-in with our spider problem.
Oh, we've displaced said spider problem.
Yes, well,
Don't brag about that.
so have we. Unfortunately, when you're in the process of hunting down rare and exotic trees to prepare for shipping and what have you, unfortunately, that tends to disturb the nests of the forest goblins.
I will turn around and say, rare and what kind of trees are you hunting?
He smirks a little bit and turns to you and he says, so let's discuss that. Especially with
Yes.
you here, Azrai. My business runs explicitly on the idea of harvesting wood that others do not, whether because it's too difficult to find, perhaps it's too dangerous, perhaps it's too exotic or unknown. I have made any kind of gestures to his collection. Outside of the books, there are many, many fine items, jewelry, gold, all sorts of other bizarre things. And he says, however, before you work for me or exist in this area, you will need to sign a contract with me to make sure we don't have any conflicts of interest. Now, when I say I'm hunting exotic trees, you do need to understand that this area is very old, and humans have not really established much of a claim in the Hager Cribs, and there are some fascinating rare trees that are excellent for all sorts of designs, whether it's unique furniture for nobles or crafting high-quality vessels for ship makers.
My eyes will narrow.
And he looks directly at Verve at the last statement. He says, especially trees that are magically charged. Those sell for, well, it wouldn't be polite to say.
Verstadt will give a laugh and say, well, we all have to make our coin somewhere, don't we, Verve?
I will give you just the heaviest glare.
He will hold up his hands placatingly and say, that being said, I will have you know I do not hunt sentient trees. We've had some experiences when the Silverwood Company was down in Bretonia. That's actually where I met the Kavintang clan, which, now that I think about it, Lady Verve, you should probably stay away from them. They don't have the fondest memories of your kind.
Oh, trust me, I have met their kind before.
I'm certain. In any event, I do expect you all to behave like civilized people while here in the camp, even if it goes against your natural impulses.
Who is he looking at when he says that?
He's looking mostly at Verve, but he does glance at the halfling.
Okay, fair enough.
The halfling gives an aggrieved look to his possibly new boss.
I will speak up and say I will agree to that so long as they do the same and grant the same respect to me, which is usually never given first.
He he shrugs somewhat and he reaches down behind him and he pulls out 4 pieces of paper that are probably wealthier looking than any item any of you have possessed. They are like gold leafed with exotic trim and like silver inlay, and it's disgustingly fancy. And he puts down one in front of each of you, and he kind of waves his hand nonchalantly, and words start scrawling themselves onto the pages. And he says, so, here's how this works. I will offer each of you a binding contract in exchange for a particular job. Now, looking at the 4 of you, I can already tell that there's a bit of kinship in that the 4 of you are a little exotic for what we tend to do here. We have a bright wizard, a wood elf, a Norse-skinned dwarf, and a halfling. 4 people who are, I think, very inclined to cause problems.
But I am a town watchman. I don't cause problems, I solve them. A key difference.
He looks over the table and raises an eyebrow and he says, and tell me, Mr. Halfling, have you heard the rumors about how dangerous the Hager Cribs are?
Yes,
That I did.
I was hoping you would enlighten us before we go and sign our souls away.
He nods and says, certainly
What?
I
He's
will.
signing our souls.
He says, certainly I will, but I'm curious, what good halfling who has a wonderful job staying out of trouble would accept such a dangerous position so far from home?
The kind of halfling who, to do his duty and his job, performed the actions that upset people who caused trouble, and may have ended up in more trouble than the corrupt officers above him were willing to deal with.
He sits back in his chair for a moment and then leans forward and says, I'll be straight with the 4 of you as far as dangers are involved. Yes, this job is dangerous. We've been having some issues lately with the forest goblin tribes in particular, a very nasty group that I believe is going by the Redback tribe. From what I can tell, and my research suggests they're a fairly numerous group. I think they come from up north. It seems the Emperor's recent dealings with wiping out the forest goblin population has caused them to migrate into our territory, unfortunately. The good news is they're not well established. The bad news is they're very aggressive and very active.
The ones that we destroyed, did they have any type of totems or anything that we saw?
The only thing that rings a bell is that the spiders themselves did have very flamboyant red markings on their backs, regardless of their actual chitin color.
Well, we might have just dealt with a band of them. And Drac will explain about the spider coloring, or the war paint on the spiders.
He nods and says, "Those are definitely the same ones. There are an awful lot of them, and unfortunately we haven't located the source of their hive yet. Otherwise, I can assure you I would have probably gone to visit myself, even if I hate wandering out into that filth. In any event, beyond that, a few beastmen here and there, nothing to write home about. The villagers are very, well, let's just say they're about what you can expect from an outcast village of superstitious nonsense. Those of you who practice magic would be wise to stay within the camp when you're not on missions. They don't take kindly to witches."
Well, also worship a peculiar god, from what I've heard.
He frowns and he goes, "Who told you about Rogenbach? Hans?"
He was particularly fearful of that
The
god.
other villagers talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. I didn't think he would bring him up. Well, yes, there are some myths about some kind of bizarre heathen god, but I can assure you it's nothing but superstitious nonsense.
I'm more worried about what the superstitious peasants will do.
Nothing, as far as so long as you're in the camp or out on task. The villagers behave themselves. They may be uneducated, dirty, and filthy, but they don't cause a ruckus. As far as that, if you go up into the mountains themselves, which you may, not on my missions, but if you're going to stay here, eventually you'll probably end up working for Anders, so I should warn you that Anders has a unfortunate fascination with the monsters that lurk in the peaks themselves. It is not...
being...
You'll meet him, I'm sure. In any event, you can consider him an associate of mine.
Very well.
As far as your actual jobs will go, the four of you, well, let's just say, I'm not going to have you actually work on the lumbering aspect of the task. None of you seem to have any prior experience with it, and I'm not in the practice of trying to educate people on how to do a task that they're clearly not fit or naturally born to do. We have plenty of lumberers. What we need are problem solvers.
Ah, I'm a problem solver.
Grand. And when I say problem solver, I do of course mean that you will be expected and bound to ensure that the camp is safe, any bizarre issues are dealt with. If the villagers misbehave, I will expect you to quiet them down. Maybe hunt some goblins, wipe out the occasional attack, protect the occasional new encampment until it's properly defended, that sort of thing.
Fair enough.
Any objections or questions?
For some of those things, that'd be more than just us four, right?
Some of them, but probably not many of them. We are a little bit understaffed at the moment.
Alright, quick question. Just to know, not because I'm considering it at all, but if we're, say, guarding the new camp and there's 5,000 goblins all charging on scary spiders, what exactly is the situation in not being stabbed mercilessly to death, guarding people who have already run away?
Well, the good news is you'll probably never be on guard, Master Halfling, because no offense, but we have people whose legs are a little longer and a little better to carry them to where they need to be to set off the alarm. That being said, if a situation arises where you find your party is unable to deal with it alone, I have no issue with you speaking to Rolf and being able to negotiate, maybe borrowing some of his men.
Mercenary, Captain.
He nods and says, though I should warn you, Rolf is rather... Let's just say that he's very good at haggling, so I would not go to him unless you are truly desperate.
Noted.
The other question is, with all of these dangers and superstitions and
Also,
all the
Drac is
various...
reading the contract the whole time. Is there anything weird that sticks out to him?
Not so far. It's mostly like kind of legalese, but if there's anything bizarre, I'll tell you.
Gotcha.
All these dangers and all these tasks you would have us perform, and our particular set of skills in solving problems. What are your payment options? How are you planning to entice us?
He leans back in his chair and says, "Ah, of course. So for the matter of payment, it's fairly straightforward. Based on the nature of your career, we'll pay you by the job as opposed to a strict salary. Just because, well, it wouldn't make much sense to pay you a salary if nothing ends up happening. That would just be a waste of our that would just be a waste of funds. And I do not like to waste things."
We could say we don't happen to like wasting our time.
He nods and he says, "Of course you don't. And I'll, of course, give you a small taste." And he reaches up his hand and his Silverhand holds it out, and coins start to materialize, basically melting from his palm into his hand. And he sets down 3 silver in front of each of you and says, "I think that should be enough to thank you for making sure Hans made it home safe and sound. I would have been aggrieved to have to deal with another lecture from the village council about losing one of their men."
How about another 2 for clearing or displacing the goblins before we even started? Proving our mettle, so to speak.
He raises an eyebrow and says, "I don't doubt you fought goblins, but do you have any proof of how many or what kind?"
Drac gives off like an itemized list of what they fought. He's used to giving reports.
Verstat will say, as we were burning down the building, we did see a shadow of some greater spider than we were fighting. It was much larger.
Drac proceeds to describe said spider because it was staring him in the face.
The big one that
Yeah.
we didn't really get to see?
Yeah, it came out right in front of him.
Okay.
He listens intently for a moment, but when the dwarf accurately recalls the vague size of it, he rolls his eyes and says, "If you're going to get concerned about every gigantic spider you run into, then this may not be the job for you." That being said...
Sotek,
Oh, go ahead.
with acute sense taste, does this taste like real coin? Or does this feel off because it's magical and it's going to change the lead in 5 minutes?
Nope, it tastes super real and super clean. It's like it's fresh off the mint.
Drax leaving the money on the table because he's seen shamans kill people with weird metal shit before, so he's not touching it until he knows it's safe.
He will think thoughtfully for a moment. He says, "For a first-time job well done, very well. 5 silver each it is."
Verstat will take it and shovel it into his pouch.
He says, "I should note that if you'd like, you may buy materials from the camp shop, though they only have very basic supplies. If you want anything meaningful, you will more than likely have to make the trek back to Jettendorf. Though we do occasionally send caravans, so you can send your money with them, though I would make sure that you authorize it through proper channels so that you don't get swindled."
Is this magic coin? Mrs. told me a story about magic wizard coins that disappeared after a day. Are these that kind, or are these a different kind? Or is that a trick? I've never really seen that kind of trick before.
He raises an eyebrow and he goes, "Master Halfling, I would be agreed for you to accuse me of the very illegal activity of falsifying coin."
That is true.
Arist puts the coins on the back of his hands and tries to twist them the way the wizard did to make the coin appear in his hand. Nah, I'm not quite getting how you did the shift. It's deft finger work, that was.
Well, it took a lot of
And he will take his 5 coins.
he will smirk somewhat and say, well, it took a lot of practice. As far as your regular pay is concerned, you will receive a tent here on the campgrounds for free. You won't be charged for food. You won't be charged for a space to live. So long as you follow by the rules, which are pretty much just behave. Don't start fights. And if a fight does start, do your best to settle it without killing. If you kill someone, you will be court-martialed.